I'm Tracy with Meet RX. I'm a coach, and I'm here today with Dr. Chaffee. How are you today, Dr. Chaffee?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Great. I thank you for coming to share your journey with us and many other informational things that you know about carnivore and the lifestyle. And can you begin by telling me, like, how long have you been a carnivore and what brought you to the carnivore diet?
So, sort of my carnivore story is sort of disjointed. So I started this probably about 20 years ago when I was taking my cancer biology class at the University of Washington in Seattle. And one of the first things I learned in biology, one of the first things they teach is that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them so that they can survive and thrive, right? Because if they get eaten, they die and they can go extinct. And that animals are also in that race, and they're becoming more and more adapted to these poisons so they can break down the poisons in specific plants safely, so that that's their targeted food source, and no other animal can eat them because it would be poisonous for them, but it's not poisonous for that animal. And so they have a dedicated food source, and that's their niche, their evolutionary niche. And so this is why you see, koalas eating eucalyptus, and basically nothing else does, and so forth. So that was something I learned early on. We were looking at this from a cancer perspective. So we were looking at carcinogens. And we learned 20 years ago that just Brussels sprouts had 136 identified human carcinogens, things that caused cancer in humans. Just white table mushrooms had over 100, spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, everything. We were given lists, actually pages and pages of lists with the number of known carcinogens next to them. There wasn't a single one under 60. Most were 80 or above. And so we were quite blown away by this. We were all very shocked, and thinking in my head, I was like, well, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And the professor just sort of looked at us and gave us a funny look and said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. And then he said something that always stuck with me. He said, plants aren't trying to kill you. So I said, all right, screw plants. And I just stopped. You go to the store and you see everything on the shelf. Everything has a plant in it. I mean, pastas, cereals, even meals that incorporate meat, they always had a plant component to it. And I was just walking around like, what the hell can I eat? Everything's a plant. And I was just like, well, eggs aren't a plant. Like milk isn't a plant. Meat's not a plant. So I just ate eggs, meat, and milk for like 5 years after that. I was playing rugby professionally. I was, training with the U.S. national team. I was traveling internationally. And while in university, I was still playing with the university team and playing with the Premiership men's team that was in Seattle. And, so I was training several hours a day after, I was in class. And, my performance just, went out of this world. I couldn't get tired. I couldn't run out of energy. I couldn't even get sore. I don't get sore anymore. I did then. I don't now. My back pain was gone. Everything was better by every metric, and I was performing better than I've ever performed. I was outperforming, other people that were training with me by leaps and bounds. And so I did that for a number of years. I went to England. I was playing professionally there in the Champions League, and didn't have the same access to meat as I did in America. A lot of it was breaded, and it was just sort of difficult. So I said, "Oh, okay, well, a little bit of breading, is that big of a deal?" And I remember a few months into it, just sort of thinking to myself, like, why don't I feel as just absolutely unbelievably amazing as I normally do? Why don't I just feel as superhuman as I normally do? It's like, am I not training as hard? Like, what's going on? Am I just, I was 25. I was like, what, am I getting old? Is this it? I'm over the hump now? And I didn't realize it, but looking back, like that was when I started eating just a little bit of plants again, and it made a massive difference. I was still able to play, I was still able to perform, but I was more sore. I was getting little niggling injuries. I wasn't I wasn't the same sort of feeling or the same sort of fitness and everything like that as I normally did. So it was kind of strange. And then looking back, that's what it was. And then the big plant push came out. It's like, Dr. Furman came out with his Gomes diet. My brother was big into that. And, you know, he was saying, oh, you know, we have to eat mushrooms because it has anti-VEGF and this and the other. I was like, yeah, but was anti-VEGF is good against, you know, cancer. It's like, great. You have cancer? I was like, well, then why are you taking chemo? So that didn't make sense to me. And, you know, also they have this one thing that you want if you want it, but it's got, you know, 200,000 other chemicals in there too. What do those do for you? You know, and I was like, oh, I know from cancer biology, this thing has at least 100 carcinogens. You have this one thing that's good against cancer, which you don't have, but it has 100 things that can cause cancer, which you don't want. So why are we taking this? And, you know, but there was just inundation of, you know, of cherry-picked data points, you know, supporting this. And, you know, I never really bought it, but I was just kind of, oh, you know, and so, you know, I ate what I was supposed to eat, I guess, and started incorporating salads and things like that, even though I didn't like them, which should tell you something evolutionarily. Why would we hate the taste of something that's good for us? That's what taste is. It's one of our main senses. If it tastes bad, that means it is bad for you because your brain and your tongue are sophisticated machines and they can recognize harmful chemicals. So the good rule of thumb, it's bitter, it's bad for you, don't eat it. And so, you know, when I was sort of lost into this, but I was basically doing, you know, almost a ketogenic thing, not that I was trying to, but I didn't really eat sugar, I never drank during the rugby season, and, you know, didn't, you know, really do much carbs often. And, you know, but I was mostly meat centric. And then you'll start seeing that the research coming out from, you know, Dr. Robert Lustig from UC San Francisco, you know, biochemistry department there, showing that fructose is actually metabolized the same way as alcohol and causes the same diseases as alcohol. And this is actually what's been responsible for the uptick in obesity and heart disease and diabetes that was previously attributed to cholesterol, which has now been debunked and shown categorically that that was not only false but fraudulent. You know, JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association, published papers in 2015 showing actual internal memos from the sugar companies back, you know, like the 40s and 50s, talking about how there was, you know, research showing that, you know, sugar caused heart disease, and they're like, we need to cover this up. And so in their own words, they detail how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol was causing heart disease when it was really sugar, and to exonerate sugar. And then one of these professors was named head of the USDA in 1965. And then magically, the USDA declares unequivocally that cholesterol causes heart disease, saturated fat, grease, cholesterol. And it changed the world, because now you had people say like, oh, well, no, you know, teachers spoken, that's what it is. And it just shut down the conversation. It discredited all these very, you know, renowned and correct doctors saying that, no, it's sugar. This is what all the data shows. And it shut it down. And, you know, the world listened. We reduced our fat and cholesterol intake by 30%, reduced red meat by 33%, increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively. And what happened? The obesity rate tripled, heart disease tripled, stroke rate tripled, cancer rates tripled. Type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even developmental delays such as autism all increased exponentially. These things almost didn't exist before then. And then people say, oh, well, it was probably going on at the same rate. We just didn't notice it. It's like, yeah, because anyone born before 1986 is an idiot. So obviously they just wouldn't have noticed, you know, that, you know, we have all these children growing up with, you know, severe disabilities. That's insane. So, you know, we can track all these things, and we have a lot of, you know, papers and studies showing, you know, the dietary links to all these sorts of things, showing that, you know, a higher LDL cholesterol, you know, the bad cholesterol level is protective against dementia, protective against Alzheimer's, protective against Parkinson's, protective against autism. Mothers with higher LDL cholesterol and higher saturated fat intake during pregnancy, much lower rates of children with autism. Women who breastfeed as opposed to bottle feed, much lower rates of kids with autism. You know, I mean, what's in formula? It's all sugar. They take out the fat because the fat's bad for you. So the brain's not growing right, and you have the sugar in there that's not really good for you either. So you have susceptible babies are going to get this sort of developmental delay. You know, and you know, the list goes on and on. You know, vegans and vegetarians are having much higher rates of autism and miscarriage and so forth. You know, and that's not correlative, that's causative. You know, so you know, the University of Texas at Austin, I believe, they showed that, you know, carnitine deficiency, you know, normally people make carnitine, but some people don't, or they don't make enough. And so carnitine is integral for the proper development of neurons. If you don't have them, your brain cells don't form properly. That's what autism is. It's a misdevelopment of our brain cells from different mechanisms. And so you have different sort of kinds of autism. And so there's one that's caused by not having enough carnitine. You have carnitine is in most animal products, but there's a ton of it in red meat, right? What's the first thing the vegetarians do? They drop red meat. That's the worst one, right? No, it's the best. And so they have a kid that doesn't really make any carnitine. And even if they're having some milk and some, chicken breasts or whatever the parents don't want them to eat, they may not get enough of the carnitine from that, and just to get them up to normal. And so they'll get this kind of autism. Then you have vegans who don't eat any animal products, and even if they have a slight deficiency, they'll get it as well. So all this stuff was coming out, and I was looking into this and reading more. And I was just saying, so I understood that fat wasn't bad for us, cholesterol wasn't bad for us. It was actually sugar, and he had all these different sorts of things in there. And then watching ShawnBaker on Joe Rogan, my brother, says like, oh, there's this guy. He's so I played rugby, obviously. I'm in medicine, and he's like, oh, there's this doctor. He played rugby in New Zealand, and he's saying you could get all your nutrition just by eating meat. And I kind of thought about, this goes against everything that you're taught in medical school and before that. But at the same time, I thought about it. I was like, well, I did that for years, basically. I didn't eat any plants or anything. And every few months, I think, to myself, I was like, am I getting enough vitamins? Do I need to eat like a banana or something? And I was like, well, my gums aren't bleeding and I feel good, so I'm just going to keep going, And so I was like, well, I did that for years, really. And, there wasn't a problem. So it's not out of the, it's not, that far out there from my point of view. But I was like, well, I'll take a look and watch this video and let you know what I think. Within 5 minutes of watching this, I was like, this guy's more right than he knows. Because he was talking about all the very, very, interesting data and stuff like that with Joe Rogan. And, but, because of the things that I'd seen with, my cancer biology and all the different things coming up, fructose and fat, all the rest, I was just like, I think that I can add to that as well. And watching that, and I realized that's what I was doing. That was the difference. That's why I felt so amazing during those years, and why I didn't feel as amazing when I went to England. And I was like, that was it. It was because I was living as a carnivore, which biologically is what we are, which I also knew in the background. But then all of a sudden, I was like, no, we actually are carnivores. This is actually how we're supposed to eat. And by eating to your natural design, you're going to be healthier. You're going to be as healthy as you can be genetically. And if you do anything else, you're going to detract from that, right? And so I was like, that's it. That's what I was doing. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these damn plants. And so I got back into it right when I came back from Bangladesh. So that would be early 2018. So I was mostly carnivore my whole life. The only thing I ever wanted to eat was meat. When I was a kid, my sister went vegetarian. I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded awful. And I asked my mom, what is a vegetarian? It was like, oh, that's someone who only wants to eat vegetables. I was like, only wants to eat vegetables? I was like, okay, well then I'm a meatitarian because I only want to eat meat. And that's all I wanted. I ate everything else by, out of sufferance. Like I just hated it, which should tell you something. Kids hate vegetables, especially when you give them vegetables for the first time, they freak out. Give them bacon, they'll freak out in another way, and so they're closer to their genetics, and so they haven't been conditioned and browbeaten, said like, no, this bad taste is good for you. Kids absorb a lot. When we tell them something, they're really like, I need to listen to my parents. Like, well, that sounds naturally programmed anyway. Obviously, can go against that, but that's by and large what they do. In those formative years, they really hardwire in a lot of behavior. So, I think of it as sort of like a Stockholm syndrome. People get, fall in love with their abuser, and they're like, oh, I really like vegetables. It's like, no, you don't. They taste awful, and you hate them, and you know it. You condition yourself to hate the taste of fat. Oh, I don't like meat. Oh, I don't like fat. And it's just like, yeah, but it's more of a conditioned response. That's generally what I've seen, and you can decondition yourself. When I started going back to just eating meat, after I was in Bangladesh, I was still cutting off the fat. And all of a sudden I had to stop myself and go, no, the fat's good for me. I believe, I believe the research, I trust the data. The fat's good for me, eat the damn fat. And so I started doing it, but I couldn't just eat fat, you know, because I was so used to like, this flavor is bad for me. And so it was really ingrained there. And so I had to go really slowly. I had to cut off a piece of fat and put it on a leaner piece of meat, and then eat it together. And then it tasted great. You know, any chef will tell you fat is flavor. You take it out, it's bland and awful, which is why they add sugar to it, which is what was a big problem, you know, with our health crisis going back 40 years. And so, you know, I had to recondition myself, even though, you know, I knew this stuff was good for me. And I you know, had grown up eating this stuff, but I would always be, you know, I would be really attracted to, you know, fat or something like that. But I'd be like, oh, I shouldn't do that. I should, oh, that's bad for me. You know, well, that's going to be a heart attack later or something like that, you know. But it wasn't. So I was back into it full on after that, and then I've just been doing a lot of research and going in deep into the data to see exactly what we know and what we can prove now, which is quite a lot, and then to take that forward. You know, right now I'm you know, working on writing up, you know, a bunch of research and so forth that I've done over the years, and basically arguing that all the diseases, the chronic diseases, so-called chronic diseases that we treat these days, are not really diseases per se, but they're a combination of toxicities and malnutrition, right? Toxic buildup of species inappropriate diet and a lack of species-specific nutrition. You can break down basically everything, obesity, heart disease, diabetes, even most cancers, into that. And it certainly will predispose you for, you know, if you are predisposed to cancer, will certainly worsen that as well. We have a lot of data on that, especially carbohydrates and sugar and so forth. There's been a lot of good research showing that. And then things like autoimmune disorders as well, you know. I mean, Dr. J.H. Salisbury was doing this in the 1800s. A 30-year research project into diet and nutrition was found that people were just eating plants as long before sugar were getting diseases other people simply weren't. A lot of autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, things like that, called by different names, but that's what it was. And, you know, even getting more sick, they were getting more susceptible to tuberculosis and so forth. And he found that he could cure them by putting them on a pure red meat and water diet. Well, what is that doing? You're giving your body the nutrition it needs, so your body's working properly. What you're also doing is you're eliminating toxins, right? You know, it's you know, people think like, oh, well, how is this going to work, and how is meat going to heal you? Well, it's not that meat is necessarily healing you. I mean, it's good for you. So your body's going to work well. But what it is getting rid of the poison, right? So, you know, it's not that surprising that if you stop eating lead, you're going to not have lead poisoning. That's pretty straightforward, right? But we don't think about that in this context. You know, we have to start thinking that way. And, you know, right now as doctors, we think of, you know, we're picking up the pieces at the end. We're treating a disease process, and we're thinking of it as a disease process, where it's not. It's a toxicity process. It's a malnutrition process. So for toxicity, you get rid of the toxin. You know, some people are more susceptible to these toxins, and they will get, you know, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis and rheumatoid arthritis and so forth. But it's still a toxicity process. It's still poisoning all of us. They just get a more pronounced version of it, okay? But it's the same cure. You get rid of the poison, and you stop being poisoned. It can take time for your body to heal, but it is that simple. It may not be easy. It may not be easy for people to give that stuff up, but it is simple. And then the other one comes from, you know, malnutrition, right? So like I said, with, you know, autism, your brains aren't developing properly. You're not getting enough cholesterol. You're not getting enough saturated fat. Your brains are made of 20 and 22 chain fatty acids. These things don't exist in plants. We don't make them very well ourselves. And things like DHA, 70% of our brain is lipids. 20% of those lipids are DHA. Those don't exist in plants. We don't really make them well ourselves. You have to get these from your diet. Right, this is why they call, you know, fish brain food, because a lot of DHA, but it's also an unsaturated fat. So this is a safe fat. This is a good fat. Well, saturated fat is really good fat too. So, and there's a ton of it in beef and so forth. So, you know, we're not giving our kids this. Our brains aren't developing properly. You know, something that, you know, Dr. Baker's spoken about, you know, at length, is that, you know, our brains are smaller now than cavemen's were. By a significant degree, you know, at least 11% smaller now on average for adult males now as before the agricultural revolution. Right, our heads are a different shape because our brains aren't growing in the same fashion. I have a friend that has 2 kids that she's been pure carnivore on the pregnancies and raising these kids. Heads are huge, massive, big old brains. Her youngest is I think like 9 or 10 months. Is walking around, all these sorts of things, and his head circumference is something like the 105th percentile. It's like, is that a thing? Like others just stops at 99. Your head's bigger than everybody else's, 99% of everyone's. Like, no, it's even bigger than that. It's off the scale. Well, it's not off the scale because he's a freak or he has a medical condition. It's because his brain is actually developing the way a human's brain is supposed to develop. And that's not something that we see anymore because we're restricting and retarding the development and growth of our brains and our children's brains. So that's a big deal.
It is. I learned about the brain and breastfeeding, and I was a Little League League leader, so I understood that the brain was about a third of the size that it will be as an adult when the baby's born, and then in that first year it grows another third. So the
Yeah,
proper human food that baby needs is breast milk,
that's it. Yeah,
especially if
yeah.
the mom is eating the proper food herself. So
And that's a key right there because my mom, when I spoke to her about, and when I was a kid, she was of the opinion or thought that your body as a mother will strip you down bare in order to get the right nutrients to your kid. But that's true in a sense. But if you don't have all the right nutrients to begin with, there's nothing to strip down, and they're going to affect your kid a lot more than they're going to affect you as a grown, matured adult. There've been at least 2 stories in the past year or so that I've seen around the world of vegan breastfeeding mothers whose children have died from their breast milk. And that's going to be, I don't know the specifics of these cases, but you think it'd be a combination of not having enough nutrients, and so they just can't sustain their life, and the combination with having these toxicities going through the breast milk, and that combination is just, it's not enough for them. And that's devastating. And again, with the vegans and vegetarians having higher rates of miscarriage. Well, if you're not providing the nutrition that baby needs, then it's not going to develop properly, and your body's going to say, this isn't working, we got to go. Good friend of mine, sister-in-law, really tragically didn't even miscarry, but her baby, which she'd been trying to have with her husband for years and they're really excited about, was basically developing in such a way that it would have been cruel to continue the pregnancy. And it's basically, this baby, this wasn't going to be compatible with life, and at some point was going to either die, or if it was a live birth, probably wouldn't make it that long. And so they decided to terminate the pregnancy, on that basis, because this baby wasn't going to make it. And it was very tragic because they really wanted this baby. You contrast that with my friend that has the 2 carnivore kids. Well, she went carnivore about 32 weeks into her first pregnancy, and she was having a really rough road with her first pregnancy. She had 32 weeks of hyperemesis, so it was projectile vomiting just multiple times a day, every day. And she started seeing things that I was sort of talking about, sort of posting different things on Facebook or whatever. But I would always back things up. I'd be like, here's the study, here's the study, here's the study, here's the study, and here's what I argue. This is why I argue it. Here's my reasoning, and here's the evidence. And so she's like, you know what? It makes sense. I trust him. I'm going to give this a try. And she just stopped eating all plants. She just started eating a lot more meat, stopped eating plants. The day she did that, her morning sickness stopped immediately. And then she had a flawless pregnancy after that. I think of it as, morning sickness is a very odd thing. We don't think about it because we think, oh yeah, that's just normal, right? Well, it's just like, name one animal in the wild that gets morning sickness. You ever seen it? The zebras just forking up on the grassland. It's like a giraffe puking from the second story down. It's like, it doesn't happen. You have a pregnant gazelle running away from pregnant lions, and one of them's going to win. So being absolutely debilitated during pregnancy is not a survival mechanism in the wild. Like, you're going to get eaten. You're not going to be able to hunt. You're not going to be able to, avoid being hunted. So this is a very, very uncommon thing in the wild. And so what is it? We're eating a bunch of things that are bad for us, and the body's going to be much more sensitive when we have a baby in our body. And you're like, get this out. You're going to kill this kid. And so you puke it up. So you get alcohol poisoning. Your body gets to the point where it's like, no, too much, and just get it out. And so I think that as being sort of a similar mechanism. And so when she stopped eating these sorts of poisons, she stopped being poisoned and stopped puking. When she had the baby, very healthy, lovely little girl. And her mom was saying, "Oh, you have to eat oats. That helps bring in your milk." And when you're in a culture that eats a lot of refined grains and that's a staple of your diet and doesn't have much vitamins in it, yeah, it might be a good idea to get some whole oats in there. But but you don't need it necessarily if you don't need it at all if you're in a carnivore sort of diet, only if you're in a deficient diet. But she was doing that for the first 3 months. She was just eating oats and meat. That was it, just oats and meat for 3 months. Kid's doing great. And she was at 3 months, she was at 50th percentile head circumference, length, and weight. And then I was talking to her and just saying, I was like, well, that you're doing great. You're doing better than 99% of people out there. But carbohydrates in general disrupt your metabolism, change how your body processes energy and so forth. And grains or a seed's a plant's baby, and everything protects our babies more than anything. That's generally where we find the highest concentration of poisons, is in the seeds, grains, beans. And so, so that's going to help you out. But also I would imagine, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the stuff you don't want is going through the breast milk. I don't know, but I would imagine. And so she said, you know what? Screw it. I'll try it. I trust him. And she did that and in 1 month, just dropping the grains, it's the only difference. It wasn't like it's massive change, just the grains. Her kid, from having that breast milk, went from 50th percentile in all of those categories to 99th percentile in head circumference and length, and stayed similar weight, just very tall, lean with a big old head, to the point that, her head grew to the point that pediatric nurse thought that this was like hydrocephalus. It was like, too much fluid on the brain. This was expanding out and was basically crushing her brain. This was going to kill her. And she said, you need to go see a specialist right away. You need a pediatric neurosurgeon. And so she went, but the kid's very bright. When you get hydrocephalus, it affects your brain. It's putting pressure on your brain. It's very noticeable. Your child acts differently. They're much more tired all the time. They can have horrible headaches or crying. Their cognition is reduced, and they get a lot of vomiting and things like that if it gets bad. So she wasn't having any of that. She was like, I don't think this is right. My kid's fine, all these things. So she went to this specialist, and and she was sitting there on the lap, just kind of going, I don't think I should be here. This is garbage. And the doctor had his picture of his family with the kids and his wife and the little family dog. And little 4.5-month-old girl just points at the picture and goes, dog, like that. And the doctor just looked at her and just said, she's perfect. You don't need to be here. There's nothing wrong with her. And so that was that. And she just started developing way faster than other kids, or, meeting her mom. Oh, and she started trying to walk at that time as well. She started trying to pull herself up on furniture, trying to get going, 4 months old. And, so she started developing, and I think she fully, developed walking at that stage. It took a few more months, but she started trying at that point. And she, flew past every single milestone, developmental milestone that we normally see these kids, because she was developing as a human is supposed to, which is far greater than what we're seeing, because we're poisoning our kids and we're not giving them enough, of the right nutrients. Then she was carnivore for another, year or two after that, and she had got pregnant with her second baby. She's been carnivore the whole time, throughout the pregnancy. Basically, had no morning sickness the whole time. She said she felt like queasy for a couple of weeks at the beginning, but didn't throw up. And that was it. And, had this baby, and they kept moving up the expected due date because the baby was developing so much faster than they normally see. And so ended up having this baby, and normal birth weight, because we have abnormal birth weights, abnormal size, and think, oh, people, this is, we have to go to more cesareans and things, emergency cesareans. It's like, oh, well, we're just evolving bigger brains, bigger. It's like, no, we're not. Our brain size, our adult brain size is getting smaller. We just have bigger birth weight, and that's not an evolutionary trait. You don't evolve to that significant of a degree as a population in 100 years. Like, that's absurd. It's not how population genetics works. So that's dumb. And what's happening is something environmental, where we're eating a lot of carbs and sugar and things like that. And we haven't, premature growth. These kids are growing way faster than they should. They're just, because it's just stuffing energy in, as a protective mechanism. The insulin's just trying to get this out of there, because high blood sugar damages your body. It's damaging this kid. And so it's just stuffing this energy in, which makes them grow bigger, too big. And then all of a sudden you have very high birth weights, or high birth weights associated with, gestational diabetes. And this is also, and these are both associated with, the later development of type 2 diabetes. Well, they all have the same cause: you're eating carbohydrates and sugar, and this is not good for you. So normal birth weight, but big ass head. And, and then he just continued to grow and grow and grow. Dude's head is big, it's massive, just a little moose. And, and he's developing, very, very fast as well. And so, this is something that is obviously important for everybody, but it's the most important for developing children. Obviously, it's the most important, like, during pregnancy and breastfeeding and early adolescence and through to maturation. Once you're in your adult form, yeah, you can give yourself the optimal fuel for what you're doing, but you develop. It's done. That part's done, and you're maintaining and so forth. But the heavy lifting is done. So that's when it's the most important. Second peak is going to be in the other extreme of age, where your body's starting to break down. Well, if you're giving yourself poison, you're going to break down faster. And if you're not giving yourself the requisite nutrients, you're not going to be able to rebuild from that damage. This is where Alzheimer's and dementia and other forms of dementia come into play, where you're, every minute that we're awake, we get, low-grade brain damage, just from neurons firing. When they're on, they're damaging themselves. Your neurotransmitters break down. Those breakdown products are actually neurotoxic. And so you have to recycle them and so forth. This is when they turn off, that's when they're, recuperating. So sleep is a major part of this. If you average less than 6 hours of sleep a night, you're 6 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's later on in life. Okay, so when you're asleep, you're fixing these sorts of things, but you need the substrate. So you go to sleep, you're getting the workers to the job site. But you can clean up the job site, make it look as pretty as you want, but if you don't have concrete, you're not building anything. So concrete is the cholesterol and the saturated fats and things like that. So you need both, right? And we're not really getting both. Probably not even getting one, most of us. And so, but when we get it, most people now, after when they get to like middle age or whatever, like, oh, I got to be heart healthy, I got to be careful, I got kids now, I've got to be safe. So I'm going to stop eating the steaks, I'm going to stop doing that, I'm going to stop eating all this stuff. And then they start getting the blood pressure, they start getting the other problems. They go, oh God, and their doctor says that, well, this is because you're eating those big steaks for the last 20 years. It's like, well, why didn't I have a problem for the last 20 years then? I'm not eating them now. Now I have a problem. We don't look at that. We think this is a buildup over 20 years. It's not. It's the problem comes when you stop eating that stuff and you start eating more of this other crap. And so this is where like Alzheimer's and dementia come in, because everyone's on a low-fat, heart-healthy diet, and their brains are decaying. They're just slowly degrading and breaking down. They're not being able to rebuild themselves. That is where that comes from. This is why you have a lot of studies showing that higher LDL cholesterol, higher saturated fat is neuroprotective. It's also cardioprotective. This is something that's very important to us. I remember, I think it was in 8th grade, we were looking at the structure of a cell. I look at the cell membrane was cholesterol, the whole thing. And you had proteins, dipped in it and so forth. But the main structure of a cell membrane was cholesterol. And I was just like, isn't that the stuff that's bad for you? Is that stuff that like gives you heart disease? I'm like, but we're made of it. I was like, oh, that doesn't really make sense. And of course it doesn't make sense, because it's nonsense, and so that's the thing. So you have people that, you can be vegan, in the middle part of your life and probably, you're not going to be as good as you would be, you know, but you can make it. You know, maybe you don't notice too much of a difference because it's sort of a slow, you know, decline and so forth. But at the same time, you know, when you at the beginning and the you know end stage of life, or towards the end stage of life, second half of life, it's going to make a big difference, you know, because you're not going to be able to really maintain it as well as you would otherwise, and you're not going to develop properly, and you only get one chance of development. And so, you know, you get a lot of people, you know, who don't realize this, or are doing the best that they can for their kids, trying to provide the best nutrition, the best environment for their children, and unfortunately, they're just getting bad advice, and they're not able to provide their kids with what they need to develop properly. I think that's very sad. It's heartbreaking really to see this, because people mean so well. You know, even you know the people that go you know vegan and vegetarian, everyone does these things for different reasons, but they're generally good reasons. You know, no one's going vegan because they want to say F you to someone. Like, that's very rarely. I mean, they think about it, they look at these things and they're like, that's a good argument. I agree with that. You know, that makes sense to me. I'm going to try it. And, you know, they get, you know, success, but generally because they'd cut out sweets and candy and alcohol and all these sorts of things, which are all vegan, all vegetarian. But, you know, that's really doing the heavy lifting. I was talking to somebody who's basically whole food plant-based the other day, but, you know, she cut out tannins and caffeine and sugar and alcohol and all these sorts of things. I feel so much better now. It's like, right, but that's because you cut out all those things. It's not because of, you know, you cut out the meat. And that's an important distinction. But, you know, people are doing this, you know, because or you know, for animal, you know, rights and things like that. You know, they like, oh, I just couldn't bring myself to doing that. Like, that's fine, but that, you know, that comes from a good place, you know, and doing that to their kids. Like, they really believe that this is the right thing for their kid. This is going to give them the right nutrition. They really believe that. And so, you know, I don't fault anyone for making any of these choices, you know, because they're doing the best that they can, and they're trying to do the best that they know how to for their family and themselves. It's just that they've been misled. You know, I don't care if anyone wants to be vegan. I don't care if someone smokes. I honestly don't care if someone does drugs. It's their choice. I'm very libertarian in this area. But, you know, what I don't like is, you know, doctors and clinicians, and, you know, especially, you know, the food industry, you know, telling you that, you know, if someone wants to smoke, they can smoke, but, you know, Marlboro shouldn't be telling people that smoking is good for them, and their doctor shouldn't be backing that up, right? You know, you want to smoke, go ahead. I mean, it's bad for you. We know this, right? But, you know, we're telling people that, you know, vegetables are good for you, fruit's good for you, grains are good for you. We're telling them that meat's bad for them. You know, it's exactly the opposite, and it's all has a vested interest in money, because, I mean, this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. Just the sugar industry alone in America makes something like $1.3 trillion a year. 400 billion of that is profit. Okay, but, you know, we have, I mean, I think it was calculated by Dr. Lustig actually quoted this figure in one of his works a couple of years ago, that in America, we spend $2.4 trillion just treating the medical, you know, issues that come from eating fructose, just fructose, right? Natural fruit sugar. People talk about this now. It's like, oh, fructose, you know, vilification is a scam. I think I saw someone, you know, like I think Carnivore Shirts, who I think he has a lot of good stuff on his website, but he's sort of gone into this. Oh, he's getting his like 50% of his calories from fructose. And he's like, oh, the vilification of fructose is a scam. It's like, buddy, it's hard ass science. This is as hard science as it gets in the medical field. You know, this is straight out of the biochemistry department. This is in biochemistry textbooks now. The cycle of fructose in your body is like the Krebs cycle. This is an actual fact of how this gets processed in your body. It is very, very bad for you. And you know, so Lustig showed all this stuff. He's published dozens of things on it, books as well. But yeah, $2.4 trillion a year just treating the effects of fructose consumption alone, not any of the other things, you know, that Salisbury and things like that was noticing back in the 1800s, just sugar. Okay. And when you recognize that, you know, the US, you know, military defense budget, something like $750 billion, right? That's 1/3 of what we spend just treating fructose. Okay. And, you know, everyone says that, you know, our national defense, you know, is, oh, it's way too big and blah, blah, blah. You know, we cover half the globe with our national defense, right? We cover it for a lot of other countries that aren't able or willing to sort of protect those areas. Like it or not, that's how much money we spend, and we spend 3 times as much just treating fructose. So the fructose poisoning, basically, you get rid of that, you have another $2.4 trillion in the economy doing something useful. You know, I mean, think about the innovations, you know, over the last 40 years, an extra $2 trillion going in like an actual direction. That's not just like, oh my God, how do we deal with diabetes? You know, imagine them just, I mean, we'd be like flying cars on the moon right now. It's just insane. And that's just fructose, you know, so that's your healthcare crisis. You can argue about what system is better, and I have my own opinions, having worked in European systems and the Australian systems and American systems, public and private, and all the everything in between. I can, you know, go, you know, if you really want to know about that, read Thomas Sowell. That guy's a brilliant man, and he has a book called Applied Economics. There's a chapter on healthcare. Read it, and you'll know everything you need to know about it. But regardless of your healthcare system, if you're spending an extra $2 trillion a year treating something that you don't need to treat, that's going to be a problem. It's going to tank any system. And you look at Medicare in America, 75% of Medicare expenditures go to treating type 2 diabetes in America. Okay, that is the budget. That is what we're spending on this, right? It doesn't need to be there. You stop eating sugar, mostly sugar, you're not going to have it. You stop eating sugar and carbs, it's really going to go away. And so that's your healthcare crisis right there. You know, and when you imagine that 9% of Americans are diabetic, type 2 diabetic, right? 9%, and that's accounting for 75% of the Medicare budget. Okay. Now realize that 40% of Americans are pre-diabetic, meaning that ostensibly, if they don't change what they're doing, in about 10 years, you're going to have 50% of Americans being full diabetics. Okay, what's that going to do to, you know, the cost of healthcare? You know, you quintuple what we're spending on it, right? So now it's 2 trillion. It's going to go, you know, several trillion higher than that in the near future if something isn't, you know, averted. If these people don't take control of their lives, and obviously we try this, but we think of it as a progressive disease. This only gets worse. You know, my mom was a type 2 diabetic for 22 years. And her and my dad, they sort of saw what I was doing early on with like my research and talking about it. I was really excited about it. I was like, oh, look at this. And I found this and look at this and this and this. And, you know, her and my dad were like, all right, well, let's give it a try for a month and see how it goes. My mom was on 3 medications, oral medications, and she was on a high dose of insulin, Lantus. And so it's insulin dependent type 2 diabetic. And, you know, so it's an advanced sort of phase of this, right? And she didn't have great blood sugar control, didn't have a great HbA1c. And in 1 month or a couple of weeks, she was really grouchy. She's like, oh, I don't really like it. I was like, well, how do you feel? I was like, oh, I don't feel good. I have horrible energy, this and that. I was like, okay, well, what's your blood sugar? You know, you're not eating carbohydrates anymore, but you are taking a bunch of things to drop down your blood sugar, but you're not. But your body's going to be making the exact blood sugar you need as opposed to being ramped up super high and then trying to like get it down. And she checked it, she was very low. And so we were like, oh, okay, maybe I'll start checking this. And she started like sort of, titering off her medications. And she ended up weaning herself off of all 3 of her medications in less than 2 months and started weaning down her dose of insulin down to the minimum dose of 14 units in 2 months. And when she saw her doctor, and got her HbA1c checked, and it went from 8.9, which is very high, down to 6.1, or sorry, 8.9 down to 6.1, and which is normal for a non-diabetic. Okay, so she, except for a little bit of insulin, she basically did not have diabetes functionally in 2 months. Okay, and her doctor just looked at this and said, "How the hell did you do this? What the hell did you do?" And she said, "Well, Anthony's been doing this research. He thinks we're carnivores and that, eating this sort of stuff, this causes the diseases and all these sorts of things." And he's been doing a lot of research. And she's like, I'd really like to take a look at his research and see this stuff. And so I just went in and talked to her for like, an hour and a half. And, she's a very bright lady. She's an MD PhD from Harvard. She has a PhD in biochemistry from Harvard. And I was like, we're looking at biochemistry all wrong. we're saying that this is a fasting state, this is a fed state. I disagree. I think our so-called fasting state is our primary metabolic state. That's a primary metabolic state of all animals in the wild, based on these studies that we've had since the 80s. And, including the human animal, which lives as a carnivore in the wild. Look at the Eskimos, look at the Native Americans, traditionally the Plains Indians eat buffalo, the Native Australians, and so forth. And, so this isn't new information. We're just rediscovering old information and sort of dusting it off because we just plastered over it with all this like fat's bad, therefore meat's bad. Fruits and vegetables are good because they don't have fat. It's not a great argument. There's more than one bad thing on earth. It's, even if fat were bad, it doesn't mean that there isn't something else bad in there. So we have to sort of, decondition ourselves and get rid of this indoctrination so we can actually sort of see clear. I remember, you say like, wisdom from the mouth of babes. I think that's really what it is just like they're just seeing things for what they are, and we've just we've learned the wrong things, we've been indoctrinated, and so we're like, oh no, this is what it is. Whereas if someone's seeing this fresh, an alien just came down, looked at this, be like, why are you guys doing that? And that's what a kid does, because they haven't been taught the wrong things. They haven't been taught the limitations of the world yet, and that are wrong. I remember hearing when I was a kid, that Native Americans, when eating a Western diet, were 4 times more likely to get obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, all the rest. And I remember thinking as a kid, I was like, well, doesn't that mean the food is causing the disease? Because if they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease. And we eat the food, and we get the disease, just at a lower rate. And what's a non-Western diet? What are they eating that we're not, and vice versa? They don't tell you that. Well, the answer to that is they were pure carnivores. They don't eat a bunch of plants and so forth. The Native Australians, same thing. You look at like different explorer records and things like that coming to Australia as well as America, marveling about how these guys only ate meat year round, even if other things were available. Unless they were starving, they couldn't get meat, then they knew which plants that they could eat safely. And in many areas they never had to, because they were very, very good hunters. They had a very good food supply, so they never did that. And they lived a great age. They were extremely healthy. They never got the diseases of the West, which are not diseases; these are toxicities, right? And now these aren't diseases of the West anymore. These are just, oh yeah, that's just as you age. Everyone gets it. It's like, yeah, except for hundreds of years, we recognize that this did not happen in these other populations. Okay, and it certainly didn't happen in our populations that much. Because, oh yeah, well, people just didn't notice it. Yeah, because Leonardo da Vinci was an idiot. That guy just couldn't pay it. He just had no idea what was going on with the world around him. Get out of here. So you had all these sorts of things. Very interesting, to read these reports of these early explorers. And but then the Native Australians here, they just get so sick. Their obesity, diabetes, heart disease, amputations, all these sorts of things. They get horrifically ill. And so, here in medicine, you basically consider them 20 years older than whatever their age is on their sticker. They're 30, you consider them 50, and so on. They're just aging so much quicker. Their bodies are just breaking down so much faster. But that's not how it used to be. It was very clear in all the records that these people lived to be great ages. And a bright spot, down here actually didn't get the whole picture together, but got enough of it to for practical purposes, because it's like this isn't, you guys don't normally eat this stuff. You don't drink alcohol, you don't smoke, traditionally you don't do this stuff, you don't eat bread and rice and all this sort of crap. You guys normally eat animals you find in the bush. Why don't you go back to eating that natural diet and see what that does for you? You got very, very sick people, overweight and sick and so forth, and it just reversed it. Just the weight shed it off, and and their diseases reversed. And so they, and that's it. I mean, that's proof of concept right there. It's actually a lot of very, very good evidence. You are reversing diseases on a large scale for very, very sick people by putting people on a carnivore diet. Now, they didn't think of it in that context. They're just like, oh, we should go back to eating what you naturally eat. People say it's like, oh, well, things are different for different populations. Like, not really. You know, we're all one species. We have a common diet. Otherwise, we wouldn't be the same species. Someone said, oh, well, blah, 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 and I scoffed at it. And I was like, okay, well, you name me one example in nature where you have two members of the same species that have a different optimal diet. I'll wait. You know, I had no idea. I couldn't come up with anything, you know, because it doesn't exist. It would be a different species, you know, and it takes a long time to differentiate species. You know, you got a polar bear and a grizzly bear. A polar bear used to be a grizzly bear, and then they split off, right? 100,000 years ago. It took 100,000 years just to become white. Okay, how are we going to change our entire digestive tract and so forth? I mean, that's nonsense, you know. And so, well, you know, depending on your blood type, like that's the most insane thing I've ever heard in my life. You know, you have one protein difference on your red blood cells. Nothing else is different in your entire body or digestive tract or any of your organs. And you're saying that that is going to fundamentally change, you know, your digestive system. And if you can process cellulose or not. I mean, what are you talking about? You know, like that is so dumb. You know, and like, you know, maybe certain people with certain blood types are more sensitive to X, Y, and Z, maybe, but that doesn't, you know, you're not going to have someone be a vegetarian or like a natural vegan because they're, you know, whatever blood type, and then, you know, and then carnivore because of another blood type. That's stupid. You know, we are one thing. You know, we have an evolved diet, whatever that is. I argue that it's a carnivore diet. You know, many people do as well. Some people argue it's a vegan diet. I think the evidence is against them. Well, it is something. Right? There should be evidence with which to test that against. But it is something. You know, if one member of the species is a carnivore or a vegetarian or whatever, then we all, you know, we aren't different in that, and to that broad of a degree. Some people have more resistances to inappropriate foods. That doesn't mean that they are the optimal food, right? We have Europeans and so forth that have had, you know, agriculture longer than other cultures. Agriculture has come up spontaneously 7 points around the world at different times. But, you know, the agricultural revolution, you know, came around 8,000 years ago. That seems to be the oldest one. You know, it's in the name too. It's a, you know, the agricultural revolution. It revolutionized the way we ate, right? If we're eating a bunch of plants before that, it wouldn't have been much of a revolution. Right. So we have people that have that background, and they're not adapted, but they're slightly adapted. So we have a bit of defenses against it, right? But we're not completely adapted because, you know, these things are, you know, causing harm and causing diabetes and obesity and, you know, heart disease and you know, dementia and autoimmune disorders and so forth. And that's happening to every population, but into varying degrees. Then you go to, you know, sub-Saharan Africa populations and, you know, Australian, Native Americans, Eskimos, so forth, Native South Americans, etc. And they're getting much more sick than other people. This is another thing, you know, we see disparities in medicine where, you know, in the Black American populations and so forth, they get higher, you know, higher rates of blood pressure and heart disease and diabetes and so forth. And, you know, I saw one thing, someone was talking about how, you know, I haven't seen any study on this, but there's just someone mentioned on a television show that, you know, Black women, when doing the same diets as a white woman, they lose less weight less quickly and so forth. And they had their own opinions on why that was, which I don't agree with, but they have their own opinions. But what I would think is that, well, right, because genetically you're, you know, more susceptible to these poisons. And, you know, everyone goes on a diet, you know, that's low fat, low meat, you know, high plants and all these sorts of things. And you're just trying to cut calories, and that's the end all be all. But we've been doing that for 40 years, and people have only gotten fatter and sicker. It's dumb. You know, when you haven't, you know, it doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with the experiment, it's wrong. And so we've been doing this again and again and again and getting the same bad results. And people think, no, it's just calories in, calories out. It's like, no, not really, because different calories mean different things in your body. Okay. And if you're eating X amount of calories and you're poisoning yourself and you're disrupting your metabolism and you're disrupting your hormonal signaling, you're going to have different effects on your body. Like, sure, you can starve yourself to death and you can lose weight. It worked well in Auschwitz. All right. But that doesn't mean that they were healthy. Okay, it's not, that's an absurdity. Just being skinny doesn't mean you're healthy. Okay, generally means that you're malnourished in the history of the world. Okay, and so when you have people, through because of that genetic past, they're going to be more susceptible to these poisons. It's going to affect them more differently. But that doesn't mean that Europeans are vegetarians and Africans are carnivores. We're all carnivores. Just some people have a bit more defenses. And so but you can see that in the studies and so forth. That's really the commonality, and that's what that's why I do what I do. That's why I express the opinions that I do, and that's why I recommend these things to my patients and my family and my friends. And whatever they choose to do is up to them. I just want to have the information. I don't want people going around thinking that smoking is good for them. So they go, I got to smoke as much as I can just to be healthy, and feeling like crap. And, and that's what they're doing with, salads and things like that. They don't feel well. They don't feel good. They're gaining weight. I don't know. It's like, I'm doing everything I can, but I just keep putting on weight. It's like, well, right. You're doing everything right because you're doing what you've been told to do, and you're doing it the way they told you to do it, but it's wrong. So I just want people to have the better information, and they can do what they want. I don't really care. It really doesn't bother me. Some people say like, it's like, oh, well, how's it going to work? If you dating someone who's not carnivore, it's like, I couldn't care less. I do this because, I see that, I don't smoke because, I don't want to, I don't want to smoke. I don't care if somebody else does. I wouldn't want them smoking around my kids. I don't have kids, but if I had kids, I wouldn't want them smoking around my kids. And I wouldn't want to marry someone who smoked when they were pregnant and all that sort of nonsense, because you have some respect for your children, for God's sakes, but what people want to do with their lives, I really couldn't care less. I just want them to have the information available, and then, and the resources available, and then they can do whatever the hell they want.
Right. Yeah, I'm amazed even as a carnivore coach, people can heal so many different things just by eating the proper human diet. And
Yeah.
I just love that you have such a passion for carnivore, and I know that everybody at MeatRx does too. And we want to get the word out, and it's like heartbreaking to see how many people are suffering truly with all
Yeah.
those toxic foods. And
Well,
so
it's very sad, and you see people. And I see people at the hospital every day, and I just look at them and it's like, you know, this is why this is happening. I can see it, just body habits, on what they're eating. They're eating wrong. Basically, they're eating everything, that they shouldn't be. But then, some people, they're vegan, vegetarian, or whatever, and you can sort of see the hallmarks of that, as well, because they're not healthy, even if they're skinny. But some people do it better than others. Like I said, that, when I was speaking to the other day, who does vegan, but she does a very limited thing. She basically is like a ketogenic whole food vegan. And, so she's doing, she's eliminating a lot of things that are very, very toxic. And so she's doing much better. And so that's okay. It's not optimal, but, it's a lot better than most people are doing. And but yeah, I think it's very important to get the word out. Like I said, this is people ask me, I was like, wow, you're really passionate about this. And I'm like, well, if there's anything to be passionate about, I think it would be this, because we're talking about these fraudulent, known to be fraudulent recommendations affecting nearly 8 billion people around the world, and billions of people going back 40 years. And the obesity and heart disease and diabetes and just absolutely unnecessary suffering and expense that this has put on people around the world and developing and developed nations, which is, it's much harder to deal with when you're in some remote village in India and you've got a diabetic foot, and and you need care, or you're going to lose that foot, or it could kill you. It's a lot harder to deal with there than it is in a place that has established medical system and so forth. That's not really the right thing to do. And when you look at how many billions of people have been affected and how many people have been sick for decades of their life, died prematurely, had their kids develop suboptimally, or even had severe or serious developmental abnormalities and so forth, that could have been prevented, that did not need to exist. That to me is abhorrent, especially because it was fraudulent. These people did this on purpose, knowing full damn well that it was wrong. And that really pisses me off. And so if you want to do whatever they want to do, that's fine. But I just want them. I don't want them to be misled in that sense anymore. And look, it could be wrong. I could be wrong. There could be a new piece of data that comes out and really show that, oh gosh, wow, we really had it wrong. I don't think it will. I think it's pretty well defined and prescribed evidence to show all this. But you never know. You don't know what's going to happen. So I don't know. I mean, I keep an open mind. I always look at different, like Furman, things like that. And he's really pushing the whole raw food vegan things now. The guy he's just wasting away. He's not look healthy. He's not healthy. I mean, he's skin and bones. Oh, I'm so skinny. I'm like, dude, who cares? And, he's saying that, and he says such misleading things. And like, I really wish I could get into a room with this guy, because I don't think he could possibly believe the things that he says. And if he does, there's very, very, very clear and easy ways of showing him that he's wrong. As when I watch these things, everyone say, oh, well, what about this guy? This vegan guy says all these things. I'm like, yeah, I'll watch it. And I can tell you, I was like, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and here's why, and here's the sources. Half the time they just make things up. The other half of the time, they're citing all this old debunked information, such as cholesterol causing heart disease. Like, it doesn't. It just doesn't. Like that is, we have massive studies post 2015 with hundreds of thousands of people showing the exact opposite of what we've always been told. The main things that things like the Framingham study, that was a cardinal piece of it was a cardinal study in cardiology, showing that a correlation, not causation, correlation between high cholesterol, not even differentiating between LDL, HDL, and multiple kinds of LDL and so forth, but just cholesterol, total cholesterol, and heart disease. And this was thought to be class 1 evidence that this is a causative sort of thing. It was never causative. It was just claiming a correlation, but it was false, because their own data, their own results from their own study actually showed the opposite. Actually showed that people with higher cholesterol had less heart attacks, had less heart disease, but they concluded the opposite against their own data. Okay, that's fraud. Okay, and this has all come out. People don't know this. I was taught the Framingham study in medical schools. Like, oh yeah, this is such a great study. It's following tens of thousands of people over 20 years and all this sort of crap. It was crap. Their own results showed the opposite of what they told the world. And that is fraudulent. Okay, it's academic malfeasance. So, we know all this now, and I don't think it's responsible or ethical to say anything different, and to just think it's not that big a deal or something like that. Or the evidence is there, and these guys talk about the main basis for their argument and their side of the discussion is all these things that have been thoroughly debunked, and then they cherry pick like Furman does. Oh, well, there's anti-VEGF. Well, who cares? Like, yeah, we use anti-VEGF in certain oncology settings, but only when people have cancer, and they take the chemical itself and use that. They don't say, oh, eat more mushrooms if you have cancer. They say, here's anti-VEGF and here's the delivery. They don't give you all the rest of the crap with it. It's just like, and you don't have cancer. It's like, why do you need to do this? People say, oh, well, what about the nutrients that are in plants? It's just like, yeah, well, they're living things. Of course, they're going to have things in there that are good for other living things, but that's not the whole story. They also have things in there that are very bad for other living things, unless that living thing has the genetic background and ability to break down those poisons into a safe way. I mean, there's, if you think about it, we know this, you get lost in the woods or something like that, you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant, right? Like most of them will kill you, okay? But, and yet we think lettuce is healthy somehow. I mean, this is a rule in plants that they use poison. That's what they do. Every living thing has a defense, right? Right. Animals can run away or fight back. Plants can't. So they use poison as their main deterrent. So if you think about it, all plants are poisonous. It's just that certain animals have evolved the ability to break down those poisons safely into safe byproducts. And, but even strict carnivore herbivores only eat like, a small collection of plants. Some will only eat like one plant, right? There's 340,000 plants in the world. Koalas eat one, pandas eat one, horses, cows, grazing animals eat grass. That's it. And they eat other things, they get sick or they die, right? The leaves that a giraffe eats are different from the leaves that a gorilla eats. Those are different from the leaves that a deer eats, and so on. You mix those around, they all get sick or die, okay? And, people think about fungi, oh, mushrooms are so good for you. Like, are they? There's 600,000 different kinds of fungus and mushroom in the world, right? How many of those don't kill you on the spot or give you a religious experience, right? There's like 5. And we think that those 5 are not only, 100% safe for you, but actually good for you, which is a bold assumption to take with your health. And in fact, it's wrong. These things are quite harmful to us, especially funguses. Funguses are nasty suckers. They're autotrophs. They're not autotrophs. They're heterotrophs. They eat other things. And so and they don't want to be eaten. They got to protect themselves. So it's kill or be killed out there. Everyone says, oh, it's natural. Yeah, nature is wild. Nature is, vicious. It's kill or be killed for every step along the food chain. You look at under microscope, you see little like your neutrophils like chasing after little bacteria and things like that. I've seen it. It's kind of cool. It's just booking after them, bam, gets them. That's how it works. And so we, just because we live in houses doesn't mean that we, the laws of nature don't apply to us. We are animals of the kingdom Animalia. These rules do apply. And, any zookeeper can tell you that if you feed an animal something that it doesn't eat in the wild, something that didn't evolve on, it gets sick. What does it get sick with? Obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer. Dogs and cats, known carnivores, and yet we give them grain and plant-based kibble, and they get sick. What do they get sick with? Obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, and so forth, autoimmune disorders, all these sorts of things. They get everything. They get everything that we get, right? Vets and things now, a lot of them are saying, like, wow, it's really wild, like older vets, they think like, yeah, now I'm really seeing these human diseases in dog. We've never really seen this before. Now we're seeing, we get feline diabetes and, all these sorts of different things that we just really never seen before in any great numbers. Now we're getting all the time, so it's like, well, because we have people, pushing, more grain-based sort of kibble. There was a statistic I saw a few years ago about dogs, like in the 1970s in America, a golden retriever average life expectancy was 17 years, right? Now it's 9 years. Okay. And people say, like, oh, well, that's because of this, hyper breeding, this and the other. It's like, buddy, they were already golden retrievers. They were already hyper bred. It's a pure breed. That's what that means. And so, and you're not going to change, again, population genetics that rapidly. And again, this is population genetics. So maybe you have some centers, hyper breeding and whatever, maybe you get some issues, whatever, but that's not the population. You can't, study genetics, look at how population genetics work. It's not dropping the bucket. It's not going to change too much. But the point is, you're not going to be able to change the species that quickly to that dramatic effect, to where their life expectancy is half what it was in the 70s in that number of generations. It's not really going to do it as a population, right? So, in the 70s, what was different? Well, people were generally giving their dogs table scraps, and people were eating much more meat, okay, much less sugar. And then you started switching over to the whole dog food thing. And I remember when I was a kid with my dog, and I was giving crap, and I was just like, I'm giving this stuff. I mean, dogs are wolves, wolves are carnivores. Like, shouldn't they just be eating meat? I was like, well, it's dog food. It's a company. They make dog food. This is food for dogs. So I guess they know what they're doing. Well, no, they don't know what they're doing. Well, they do know what they're doing, and they know they're doing the wrong thing because it's cheaper. You're putting the filler and crap in there.
It comes
And
down to the buck.
it's not a dog. Yeah. And so, my dog died when she was 8 of liver disease. It absolutely broke my heart. And I just think back now, it's like, she would have lived into her 20s if I had just gone with that thought then and went with it. We had a cat as well, very sweet little guy, and he got cancer. He got cancer in his lung. Didn't smoke, but there you go. And he was very, very sick. I came coming back when I was like second year of medical school or something like that. He was cachectic, which means that he was, very, very, seen a concentration camp. Is so malnourished. They're just skin and bones. And he really wasn't eating. I was like, oh my God, this little guy's got days, really, And my mom noticed, like, the only thing that he would eat, they had some, like, gelatinous sort of juice from a chicken or whatever, sort of gave it to him. It's like, oh, he'll eat that, he'll eat that. I was like, okay, well, let's just give him that then. And so my mom, like, every day would sort of roast down a chicken, literally just for him, and get all the juices and give him those juices. He started gaining weight. He started going more. He looked like himself again. Normally when you see this, is a single tumor necrosis factor alpha that is something that generally when you start producing this from your tumor cells, you start really losing weight. This is why people have really uncontrolled weight loss when they get cancer. That's the main factor is tumor necrosis factor alpha. And it's taught in pathology. I was taught in pathology in medical school that once you start kicking off this, TNF alpha, you're going to start dropping weight. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter your caloric intake. It doesn't matter. You will keep losing weight. You cannot go against this. You're just going to keep dropping. That's what's taught. And this went exact counter to that. And you look back, it's like, well, no, he was just eating as he was supposed to. Now his body's working as it's supposed to. And so he actually did put on weight in the face of this massive tumor that filled up half his lung. He lived a year and a half after that. Literally, this guy looked like he was going to be off in a couple of days, and just turned right around. And he still had the cancer. It was still just so big that it was like it wasn't, couldn't get rid of it. But he lived another year and a half. He had another year and a half of happy life, and it was very good. And and that's something that's applicable to every animal. You eat what you're supposed to eat, and you'll get better. So I think this is something that is vital, to the health of the planet. And you look at all sorts of people that actually show that big animal agriculture will literally save the planet. Because this is what regenerates the soil. This is what allows plants to grow in the first place. People say, oh well, making all this pasture land. Is like, no, you don't necessarily have to. You can put animals through range land and forest land and things like that. You don't have to cut a single tree, but you do if you want to grow corn. You do if you want to grow palm seed oil. 55% of the rainforests in Borneo are gone. And they say, oh, well, we've replaced these with plants. It's the vegan argument. We replaced these with plants. And so really it's same. It's like, no, it's not, because that's not an environment. That's not a habitat. In fact, animals that come into, despoil your crops, you shoot them, and you get rid of them. And so that's not really a habitat, is it? It's not a jungle. The orangutans are dead, and they don't live in your palm jungle, so it's not their environment. And so to grow a crop, you necessarily have to destroy an entire ecosystem. All the plants and animals that were there are now gone, and you grow one crop, and then you kill all the animals that are trying to come in and eat that crop. Okay, this is devastating. And plants take nutrients out of the soil. Well, how do they get back in there? Well, usually the animals come through, eat down the dead plants, and defecate and urinate, and that's what recycles these nutrients. It's very, very important to the environment to have a lot of animals recycling these nutrients. Okay, and we're not doing that. And so this is, well, I mean, we are in a sense when we're using these fertilizers. Where do you think people get? Where do people think we get fertilizer from? From manure and things like that. So we want less and less and less animals. Well, where the hell are you going to get the fertilizer from, Chief? It's not going to work. And all these, oh, we have these fires in the Amazon. Well, that was definitively proven to not actually be fires in the jungles themselves, and no one was clear cutting and burning these sorts of things. That was a lie. These were actually the farmers. They grew their crops, and then they have the chaff left over, and they burn that down. They burn the old crops in order to make room for the new crops. Okay, so that's what the fires were. And the NASA satellites actually show that there were below average fires for that year in the Amazon. Because people say the Amazon, they think the Amazon rainforest, but that's not true. The Amazon is an area in Brazil. So it's just like, saying, in Arkansas, these Arkansas fires. Well, if there's a forest named the Arkansas forest, people just assume that's it. It's like, no. It's like way over here in other parts of Arkansas. So that's what it's saying. You're talking about a state in Brazil that had fires, as opposed to, the Amazon rainforest was burning. That was nonsense. And, and so, there's several people. There's Alan Savory in Zimbabwe, who's been doing this for 40 years now, taking large herds of animals, putting them through deserts and things like that. And they actually regrow these deserts, getting these animals through there. I think Dr. Baker had him on his podcast, on the Human Performance Outliers podcast a while ago. And he has TED Talks and other things like that. He's written a textbook and all these sorts of things. So there's a lot of information out there. I think he gets one part of it wrong, where he says that, oh, well, large, herding and things like that is what made the great deserts in the first place. I don't think that's accurate. I think that's something that he learned, and he learned at the time. This is what he changed. He's like, oh, no, actually, you want animals here because animals replenish the land, but he's still stuck in what he learned before, is that animals caused this in the first place. Well, no, that was the basis for saying that animals will perpetuate it. But he knows that's wrong. He knows that it's the opposite's true. And so, in fact, you look back, I would argue that it's agriculture. You look at, we had studies that came out in the 1990s looking at the soil underneath the pyramids and the Sphinx in Egypt. And they found, like, oh, is it always desert people? Were these built in the desert? And they were shocked. And they're like, no, actually, this is more consistent with jungle. These were jungle pyramids. These were jungle people. Or how the hell did that happen? Well, one of the things you learn as a kid is that, Egypt was a breadbasket of the ancient world because the Nile River flooded every year, and the silt, redeposited all these nutrients. So it replenished the topsoil every year. Well, they have it right there. They have the answer right there, but they don't take that next step in logic. And they go, okay, what does that mean? Well, that means that the soil needs to be replenished every year. And if it doesn't get replenished, it's not going to work. And so not every place had a Nile River. And so they actually turned into deserts because they didn't know what was going on. And we had this in the American Dust Bowl era. We had all these, dust storms and locust swarms, all these things. It sounded like a Bible story out of Exodus or something like that. People thought it was. They thought this was the wrath of God, and things won't grow because God's angry at us and so forth. Well, they figured it out. This was from, the farming techniques that we were doing, that we were losing all this topsoil, and that was going up in these big dust storms, and, we weren't growing anything because of the way we were farming. And so they changed the way we were farming, and that's helped a lot, but we still lose something like 27 billion tons of topsoil a year. That's an area the size of Kentucky every single year we lose in topsoil. That's not sustainable. And that's from farming, even our modern farming techniques. It's not going to last that long. Topsoil, half an inch of topsoil takes about 500 years to form. So this is a finite resource, and so that's a problem. And it's animals that replenish this. It's animals that regrow the land and so forth. You look at, there's satellite images, infrared images that look down on the Sahara Desert, and actually found that there's actually human settlements like all across what is now the Sahara Desert. And it showed that actually, several thousand years ago, it wasn't a desert. This was savanna or whatever. And well, what can this be from? You know, people are farming. This agriculture way of agriculture and making bread and so forth is spreading around the, you know, the ancient world, and you're getting places blasted and turning into deserts. And all of a sudden you've got the Sahara Desert. You know, the middle of America almost turned into another Sahara Desert. We barely averted that, you know, but that was the direction that we were heading. Well, you know, that's a man-made desert. You look at where did agriculture come from? There's, you know, the epic Gilgamesh, like the oldest sort of written story, you know, talks about this time, this ancient kingdom, this ancient, you know, city, and this grasslands with deer and long grass and cedar forests and all these sorts of things. Um, and you know, that was based in what is now Iraq. You know, this is where, you know, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, all these sorts of these beautiful, luster, you know, wonderful things. This is where agriculture was first sort of discovered in that area, in ancient sort of Samaria. And so, you know, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, Gilgamesh, the plains, all these sorts of things. This is now modern day Iraq, you know, in the Middle East. And so, you know, doing this, I believe, you know, from the not having a Nile River flooding every year all over the place, you know, maybe, you know, they had it in certain areas, but, you know, that's going to cause desertification, you know, and you didn't know how to reverse it back then. You couldn't reverse it back then. It just, and so people just, oh no, that was from, you know, animal herds. Like, really? Because there were 100 million buffalo going across the middle of America, and, you know, probably, you know, hundreds and hundreds of million, oh, sorry, yeah, 100 million buffalo, and hundreds and hundreds of other, hundreds of millions of other large game animals in the middle of America. And the grass was 9 feet tall, you know, is because there were so many animals that the land was so fertile. You know, I mean, the early explorers that went across America, they were talking about how they could tie the grass in knots over their horse's head, you know, in America. Okay, so this is wild stuff. And it's not only did that support these, you know, billion plus massive animals that ate the grass and things like that, and all the animals that, you know, off of that, you know, but it's the animals that supported the grasslands. It's the animals that supported the plants. Okay, it's a symbiotic relationship. You really can't have one without the other. These all evolved together. You know, the plants and the animals evolved together. You know, this is all. You can't just, you know, take it out and have that and have it be good. No, you're going to seriously disrupt the system, and it's going to absolutely mess things up. So, you know, and then Peter Balistrad, he's may have mispronounced his name. Very bright guy. He's an agronomist, and he talks about this. He shows the science behind, you know, how livestock replenish the land and how they work in the environment, and how this is very, very vital to the ecosystem and so forth. It's very, very important, and he does a lot of great work. He's a very interesting guy. I mean, he has a podcast as well, but he does a lot of talks on various things. He's on YouTube, but he's a very interesting guy, and a very bright guy. And he has hard facts, you know, to back these things up. And so, you know, this is something that I think is a major. I mean, it's the same thing. You know, the vegans think the same thing. They think this is going to, you know, change the world. You have to go vegan for whatever. I agree. You know, what we eat and what we do absolutely have a major impact on us as humans and the world at large. I just disagree with, you know, what the answer to that is. You know, but and I think, you know, when I see all their arguments and so forth, they really don't hold water. But I always look at them. I always want to see, because I don't want to be missing something. You know, but every time I see these guys, it just sort of reaffirms, you know, my beliefs. And because it's just like, you know, you guys are perpetually repeating the same tired lies that have been completely disproven and debunked. And then you're coming up with other things. You're just assuming, you know, one jackass, he was saying, like, it's like, oh yeah, well, no one's ever lived more than a year on a carnivore diet. It's just not sustainable. Well, I was like, well, okay, well, I'm going on fucking 20 years here, Chief. So, you know, what are you talking about? You know, I ever heard of a Native American that, you know, some of these people have never eaten plants in their life through their natural lifestyle. You know, they have the, you know, tons and tons of studies and things like that, you know, coprolites, you know, showing that, you know, fossilized feces and so forth, showing that there's no fiber in there. You know, there's no seeds, there's no nuts, there's no plant material at all. You know, it's just sort of, you know, things that you'd find from meat. You know, the stable isotope study, you know, showing that, early humans, or not even that early, but like 50,000 years ago plus, these had a higher carnivore rating than, lions and hyenas alive at the same time in the same area. Okay, so they lived their whole damn life just eating meat. The Eskimos do this too. There's no plants up in the North Pole anyway. How are they going to get that? They're not taking supplements. They don't have drugstores. And when you're actually out living in the natural sort of world, they're having babies. They're living to be, well over 100. They're not even losing their teeth. That's the thing. You can't, chew your leather. You chew on leather and things like that. Once your teeth wear out, they're like, okay, I'm useless now. I can't do anything. This is where traditionally they would go out to the snow and expose themselves because they're not pulling their weight. There's a harsh environment. You have to pull your weight, and so they weren't even losing their damn teeth. And and there's no vegetables for them to eat. You cannot live your whole life, grow a baby inside you, support that baby through your breast milk, and have that baby live its whole life and make more humans in the same way by only eating meat, unless meat had absolutely everything you needed in it by definition. It gets simpler than that. What is the point of eating? We're trying to build and maintain our bodies. We're trying to build and maintain meat. So what by definition is going to have everything you need? Meat. You see some of these people arguing about, oh, how do we get this big human brain? Oh, must have this nutrient, from this plant, from this thing, all these different sorts of things. They're literally crossing continents. And they go, oh, how did they do it? It's like, well, genius. I can think of one food source that by definition has everything you need to grow a brain. A brain. So, that's what you see in the early fossil record millions of years ago when our ancestors first started eating animals and things like that. They often were, scavengers, foragers, and things like that. And one of the earliest tools was using a rock to basically use a pound stone to crack open skulls of animals that were just dead and laying there so they could get at the brain. Millions of years before we had the first sort of workstone tool with probably Australopithecus 3.3 million years ago, where it's like a broken rock in half and use the sharp edge to kill and dismember animals and things like that, but just using the rock as a smash sort of thing. That was been going on for millions of years before that, and then someone figured out like, oh, I can get an edge on this. Like, oh, that's pretty nasty. Yeah, let's do this. So that's exactly what we were doing, is we were eating brains and so forth. So there's a ton of evidence. People say it's like, oh, well, we're vegetarian, this and that. It's like, well, you can keep saying that all you want, but the evidence is totally against you. And, so it's, I think it's good to see the other side of the argument. As John Stuart Mill said, if you only know your side of the argument, then you don't know much. It goes on from there, but you really need to hear these things in the most persuasive form from the horse's mouth. So you need to go, watch Furman, read his book, and look at his arguments, and the other people in that category as well. Even the guys, like Saladino and Carnivore Shirts, whatever, they're saying, oh, you should eat fructose and this, that, and the other. I wildly disagree with it. But you should still see like, okay, well, what do they know that I don't? Do they know something that I don't? And what are they doing? The answer to that's no. I just think they're wrong. But I can I can say why, just because the bounty of information that we have on this, mostly from Robert Lustig, but from other sources as well, is very, very conclusive that this stuff is super bad for you. But check it out. And they say, oh, I feel so great on it. This and the other. It's like, well, yeah, it's a drug, man. Drugs make you feel good. That's why people do drugs. It gives a dopamine hit to your addiction centers of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and meth, and kill the same areas of your brain as meth to the same extent as meth. There are MRI studies showing that. Okay, so this is a drug. Okay, this is why kids get a sugar high. They get really pissed off if you take their sugar away. They feel good. There was that. What was that guy? Super Size Me. He did that whole thing where they ate McDonald's every day for a month. And he did it in a stupid fashion. But, one of the things that he said that I thought was interesting was, he was like, oh, I just felt lethargic. I just felt bad. I just felt horrible. But then I got a meal on this and I perked up and it felt like great. And he started drinking his, sugary soda. Well, that's a drug response. You feel bad. You feel gross. You feel this. And then you get your drug and you're, oh, I got it again. That's a drug. That's a drug response, and we know it's a drug. This is been shown very conclusively. And it breaks down in your body to the same byproducts as ethanol, right? Gram for gram fructose is ethanol. You get the same diseases from fructose as you do ethanol. Fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease, eating cancer, and Alzheimer's, and so forth. And I would argue all autism as well. We don't have studies showing this, but we have studies alluding to this, that kids that have higher sugar content and so forth end up having higher rates of autism as well. You're still going to need the genetic predisposition, such as kids with carnitine deficiency and so forth. But I would bet, and I want to set up some animal models showing this, what fructose does to the developing brain and so forth. But I guarantee you that this is a causative factor in some of the kinds of autism that we see. But that's the thing, we have all these diseases. We have type 2 diabetes, but I'm sure you remember, before the 1990s, type 2 diabetes was not called type 2 diabetes. It was called adult onset diabetes. And it's because people almost exclusively got it in middle to late age. They were almost always alcoholics. There's a good reason for that. And then a bunch of 10-year-olds in the 90s, this is when we stopped eating fat and started eating more plant-based things, and everything tasted like crap because fat is flavor. So everything was bland, and so they put a bunch of sugar into it. I don't know if you remember Intamins. I remember seeing those as a kid. There's just this coffee cake just covered in frosting, and there's like fat-free. I was like, oh my God, fat. I remember my mom seeing that. Oh my God, fat-free? It's fat-free cake. And she got like 2 of them. And I remember thinking as a kid, I was like, okay, that might be fat-free, but there is no way that's good for you, and yet we bought into this because it didn't have fat, and that was the only bad thing for you, right? And sugar was just an empty calorie. Oh yeah, not giving you any nutrients, but basically it sounds self-deprecating, but what they were doing was actually very devious. They were basically saying that it was a lot better than it really was, but they did it in a way to make you think that they were, being honest about it. Like, oh, look, it really isn't that great for you. You really should eat something else, but but not actually telling you like this is toxic, and so we're eating all this sugar, we're getting sick, and then kids in the 90s were getting it's like 10-year-olds getting adult onset diabetes, and I'm like, oh my God, adult onset diabetes, but he's 10. How can a 10-year-old get adult onset diabetes? He's not an adult, and he's got fatty liver disease, but only alcoholics get fatty liver disease. So what's going on? And then so they, instead of actually looking into it, okay, what the hell changed? Why are these kids getting something that they never did before? They decided to just rename things. So now it's type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Okay, instead of actually saying, oh, it's probably just happening all the time, we just didn't notice. Again with this, it is always, instead of actually looking and say, okay, something changed here, and being smart enough to see that and try to look for what that was. People just said, yeah, it's probably always there. Yeah, we're just idiots. No, like maybe you are, but the majority of people weren't. And most of the diseases we have, have been described for like hundreds of years sometimes. Those people were pretty damn smart to piece those things together. Our circulation, the circulatory system, pretty damn complex. Figuring that out from scratch was pretty damn bright, okay? Pretty sure these guys would be noticing, these massive amounts of people, anybody getting over the age of 70 just had horrible dementia and so forth. Didn't happen. The numbers were not there. They did happen to a certain extent, but we have clear data on this going back 150, 170 years. No, this was not a prevalent thing. Simple way of looking at this. We didn't have all the aged care nursing homes back then as we do now. People died a lot earlier. No, they didn't. You had average from birth dying earlier, but that's because in the 1800s, 3 out of 5 kids died in infancy. You have to grow pretty old to offset 3 people dying at age 0 and get that up to 36, which it was in 1850. But you look at the same census data, and they go by year. Like if you make it to age 10, like your average life expectancy would be in the 50s. You make it to 20, it's higher, and so forth. And once you get into like actual adulthood, it's very similar, tracks what it is now. So no, it's not actually all that different. People did get to be quite old. I was looking at some ancestry stuff. My great grandfather on my mother's side lived to be 100, 1875 to 1975. My dad's great grandfather, one of those. He lived from something like 1842 to 1942. And this guy probably fought in the Civil War and saw World War II. You know, that's a wild, expansive history, you know. Okay, well, what's going on there? I thought everyone died in their 30s in the 1800s. Well, no, actually, they did. This is just these are averages from birth. So, you know, like what Mark Twain said, you know, there's three kinds of lies. There's damn lies, and there's statistics. So these are lies of statistics. You're saying, oh, whoa, you know, people did that, not telling you the whole story. Like, no, that's actually not as that's not what you think it is. So, you know, people are growing old, and you know, also people growing older. You know, that doesn't explain why 10-year-olds are getting adult onset diabetes. Okay, it doesn't matter how old you grow, that 10-year-old is still 10. Okay, so that's wrong. You know, and they say it's like, well, you know, we're not getting as much exercise, we're more sedentary, and like doesn't really hold true either. We have studies with the Maasai in Africa, you know, looking at like, oh, they're basically built like Olympians, they just run forever and all these sorts of things. And they're like, and they look at their exercise and they're like, oh, actually, you know, they don't train like an Olympian trains. They train basically, there was one study that showed that they had 1.6 times as much, you know, activity, athletic, you know, exercise activity than the average American. Sedentary fat slob on a couch. 1.6 times, not even twice as much as that fat clown does. You know, not even 1.6, okay, 1.5 times more. And they look lean and strong and athletic, and they are, okay? Well, they're carnivores, okay? But then, you know, you look at animals as well, you know, because, oh, well, you know, animals are all big and strong and this, that, and the other, and we're fat and squishy. Oh, that's because they're out in the wild running around. Like, well, that doesn't explain animals in the zoo. You know, they live in a box the size of this room their whole life, you know, and they're ripped. They look like they're on steroids, you know, and like, you know, and you know, that's the definition of a sedentary lifestyle, you know. So that doesn't explain that either. And maybe, oh, well, they have this exacting nutrition and this, that, and the other. Yeah, they're being fed exactly what they're supposed to eat. They're being fed exactly what they're designed to eat, and we're not. You know, and when you give animals grains and sugar, they get the exact same diseases that we get. Dogs and cats, all so forth, whatever. Look at cows. We fatten them up by giving them grain. Okay. What does that do to us? It's fattening us up too. Okay. It deranges your metabolism, makes you store energy in your fat because you're trying to get rid of this blood sugar. It's very toxic. And it causes you to overeat, you know, because it disrupts your hormonal signaling pathways, makes your brain think you're starving to death when you're not. So you just keep eating. You don't know when to stop. In fact, when you think it's time to stop, is way past when you should have stopped, right? This is why people, you know, gain weight, especially when they're eating sugar and so forth. So it does that to cows too. We do it on purpose to cows, okay? And then, you know, I saw one thing where they had this lion, a wolf, or sorry, lion or tiger, a wolf, and a bear, and they were rescued. And they had this little zoo sanctuary or whatever, but they were, you know, they say, oh, now they're happy and they're playing around. It's supposed to be this nice thing. They wanted it to go viral.
Are you there?
I don't know what happened there. Yeah, it just sort of reset. No, all right. But yeah, so they had these things. They wanted to be like this nice viral sort of happy, look at what we did for these nice animals. And it was in a sense, but these adult animals, they were so fat and unhealthy looking. They had these jowls. They're just swinging around. It was really unhealthy. And everyone just reacted like, and they were showing them, feeding them like these big, like king size Snickers bars and things like that. They give them these big chocolate bars, the big bear, like, and they're like, what the hell are you doing to those animals? Like, those are so unhealthy with this. And they were really upset. Like, these animals are very healthy. We just give them candy bars every now and then. It's a treat. Normally they have a very good prescribed diet. I was like, yeah, it looks like it. Yeah, it looks like they're doing great. You know, they were so obese. They were so unhealthy looking. It was really sad to see. And but it's also sad because these people obviously care about these animals. They want the best for them. They don't realize what they're doing. They do this to kids too, right? And you say, oh, well, kids like candy. Well, of course they do. It's a drug, you know. And people like drugs. You know, you give them some cocaine, I'm sure they'd like that too. You know, like that's still a harmful substance. You're like, oh, but it's a treat. It's just a little bit, you know. It's just like, but you never give them drugs. You never give them cigarettes. You never give them alcohol. You never give them cocaine. You know, but they like it, just a treat every now and then, just a line or two, you know, on the weekend if they were a good boy. You know, no, I mean that sounds absurd, But to me, giving them sugar for those same reasons is just as absurd, you know, because it is harmful. It is very harmful. It causes serious damage to their little bodies. You know, you never give a kid alcohol, but you give them orange juice, 12-ounce glass of orange juice, you know, not even added sugar, just fresh squeeze, can have as many grams of fructose as 3 shots of 40% whiskey have alcohol. And it does the same damage to their little bodies. It just doesn't get them drunk, you know. And while alcohol, you know, alcohol is almost better in a sense. A, you get something for it, a little more bang for your buck, right? You get a little drunk or a buzz or whatever. You get that's better, but it's also self-limiting. At a certain point, you're going to pass out. You can't pass out from eating sugar. You're just going to keep eating it all day. I remember we went to Costco when I was a kid. We got like a 10-pound bag of gummy bears. Jesus Christ. Like I was like just handfuls of this stuff at a time over summer break. I think I polished off a 10-pound bag in probably 2 or 3 days. And it was disgusting to me. It actually tasted bad. And like my mouth was getting all raw and everything from it. But I just couldn't stop. I just kept eating it. I just kept eating it. I just kept eating it. It was just like, because it's a drug, and like, I don't even like this. I don't know why I'm still doing this. It's a compulsion. My brain was, get this, because it's a drug. That's what drugs do, you know? And so we'll just give them a little treat. It'll be nice. And they're like, okay, no, that's a super bad idea. But, you know, it's just something people don't realize. They don't realize how bad it is, you know?
Right. Well, Dr. Chaffee, I thank you for coming on to the MeatRx channel and sharing all of this information. I know it'll be helpful to many people.